I will give you a brief summary of how the First World War happened. Please stay until the end of the video. The First World War was one of the deadliest and longest war events in the history of mankind up to that time, which is why, until the outbreak of the Second World War, it was known as the Great War. The First World War began on July 28, 1914, and ended on November 11, 1918. It was an armed confrontation on a global scale involving the most developed countries, the great industrial and military powers of Europe, which were later joined by the colonized countries of Africa and, later, the United States, among others. This war arose from various imperial conflicts arising from economic rivalries, political power, and the distribution of colonies, especially in Africa. Two fronts were formed, one known as the Triple Entente composed of France, England and Russia, which was later joined by other countries. On the other hand, the Triple Alliance was formed by the powers of Central Europe, which were the German Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Italy, which was later supported by other allied countries. About 70 million European soldiers were mobilized in this war, and the death toll was very high, approximately 10 million soldiers and 7 million civilians. The First World War left as a consequence a great demographic and social devastation, as well as a strong economic crisis. For empires disappeared, the German, Russian, Austro-Hungarian and Ottoman empires, and new countries were formed, which changed the demography of Central Europe. However, its aftermath and discontent led to an even more devastating war years later, characterized by nationalism, fascism, and the establishment of the first communist state which, together with the United States and Japan, constituted the world's new powers. Causes of World War I. The main causes of World War I were political, economic and nationalistic. At the end of the Franco-Prussian War, a period known as the Armed Peace began, in which the great empires of the world, including the newly formed Germany of 1871, experienced constant tension, but which did not lead to any type of armed confrontation. The major disagreement at that time was the distribution and domination of the colonies located in Africa, dominated, for the most part, by the United Kingdom and France. The Austro-Hungarian Empire had no colonies and Germany had some territories, from which it obtained almost no economic gains. On the other hand, there were political disagreements between France and Germany, as well as between the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Russia over the domination of the Balkans. Likewise, a nationalism was developing in Europe that drove citizens to fight for their country and defend their territory as if it were the most important one above all others. This nationalism was very marked and led to rivalries between citizens of different countries. As a result, two alliances were also established. The first was led by the Chancellor and architect of the Union of Germany, Otto von Bismarck, known as the Bismarck System of Alliances, between 1871 and 1890, in order to reduce the power of France. Then, between 1890 and 1914, alliance systems were established in which Russia allied with the United Kingdom and France against Germany, known as the Triple Entente, 1907, which was later joined by Italy, which initially supported Germany. Likewise, another alliance known as the Triple Alliance, 1882, was formed by Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire and Italy, and later, the Kingdom of Bulgaria, with which the Germans intended to isolate France and detract from its supremacy. The trigger for the First World War. On June 28, 1914, the Habsburg Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria and his wife were assassinated in Sarajevo, Bosnia. A group of young nationalists planned an attempt on his life, however, it failed on the first attempt. An hour later, when the Archduke was on his way to visit the injured victims of the attack, he met Gavrilo Princip, a young member of the Black Hand gang of nationalists, who drew his gun and shot the Archduke and his wife to death. July Crisis. After the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the crown of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a political crisis arose during the month of July in which the network of alliances was established. Russia supported Serbia, for which reason the Austro-Hungarian Empire declared war on Russia. Likewise, Germany also declared war on Russia, an empire that already had the support of its allies France and the United Kingdom. Finally, on July 28, 1914, the Austro-Hungarian Empire declared war on Serbia, the main reason being the lack of response against the radical nationalist movements that motivated the crime committed against the Archduke. On August 2, 1914, the Ottoman Empire signs a secret alliance with Germany, and on the 3rd of the same month Germany declares war on France. Development of the Great War. The Austro-Hungarian Empire and Germany formed a major territorial bloc. To avoid a confrontation on both fronts, Germany decided to invade Belgium and implemented the Schlieffen Plan, created by Marshal Alfred von Schlieffen, in order to achieve the invasion and defeat of France in August 1914. After the invasion of Belgium, the United Kingdom declared war on Germany. The German advance was stopped by the French and the British Expeditionary Force after the confrontation at the Battle of Marne in September. Western Front and Eastern Front. At the beginning of 1915, new confrontations took place in which the Triple Entente and the Triple Alliance kept fighting from their trenches, which extended in a long line of approximately 800 kilometers long from Switzerland to Belgium, a position that was almost invariable until 1918. Under these circumstances, the constant balanced confrontations on the Western Front were developing. The armies involved in the war made use of their best armaments such as tanks, machine guns, grenade launchers, poison gas, among others. However, there were few advances and the casualties of soldiers in each battle were very high. Also, the trenches did not have the necessary conditions of health and welfare for the soldiers, and soon became an unhealthy space where these young men were in subhuman conditions. On the other hand, in the Eastern Front, the confrontations between the German and Russian forces took place. In August 1914, the Battle of Tannenberg took place in East Prussia, and in September the Battle of the Masurian Lakes. The Russian army suffered a significant number of casualties of soldiers. Trench warfare, 1915 to 1916. The series of armed engagements that took place, over several miles, on the Western Front during 1915 and 1916 is known as trench warfare. Both sides had built a line of trenches difficult to penetrate that managed to keep many of their soldiers safe. This characteristic made the confrontations more difficult and prolonged because the trenches offered a great protection, reason for which they had to make use of an important armament resource and heavy artillery. For that reason the confrontations were bloody. The war was prolonged and stagnated for a while until September 1916, when both the French and the Germans tried to break the front and there was a confrontation in the city of Verdun, but the Germans did not manage to take the city in the face of the French defense. During the process of trench warfare, Italy, a country allied with Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire, broke away from them and joined the Triple Entente. End of World War I. The German army was able to deploy its soldiers on the Western Front once Russia withdrew from the fighting of the war to attend to the internal conflicts provoked by the revolution. However, with the participation of the United States and the Expeditionary Force led by John Pershing, the Triple Entente, with which it had various trade agreements, was able to superimpose its power with greater numbers of soldiers, weapons and other war resources. The Entente troops, led by Ferdinand Foch, were reinforced and better equipped than those of the Alliance, which were quite exhausted and lacking in resources, as a result of which they were unable to invade Paris in June 1918, and lost the Second Battle of Marne. Likewise, the Central Empires were quickly overthrown. The Ottoman Empire could not avoid being defeated by the British forces, while the Italians achieved victory against the Austro-Hungarian Empire in the Battle of Vittorio Veneto. With this defeat, the Austro-Hungarian Empire signed an armistice. Finally, in Germany the population was going through a great social and political crisis from which a workers' insurrection arose in Berlin. This situation led to the abdication of Emperor Wilhelm II and the subsequent establishment of a provisional government in the German Republic. Click on the description of this video to receive your free self-help book. Thank you for watching this video, Until another opportunity, friends.